This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Happy Thursday to you. Welcome to another edition of Plain Talk Live. I'm your host, of course, Rob Port, and I'm looking at the wrong camera. I have two web cameras now because it's the big time. I got one that's coming straight on and one off to the side that's a little easier for me conversationally, and now I'm not looking at the right camera, which just goes to show you, as a video production expert, I'm a decent columnist. We're going to talk a little bit about the Democratic-NPL in North Dakota, which has struggled in recent decades, I think you could say. And I'm not trying to be mean-spirited or facetious or whatever. It's just a reality. It's been a tough time for the party. We just came through a political cycle, the 2020 election cycle, where North Dakota's Democrats did not do very well. And now they're electing new leadership. There's a race, multiple candidates running for the party's chair and vice chair. And there's also multiple candidates running to be a national committeeman or national committee person, I guess, depending as the case may be, for the Democratic National Committee. Now, essentially, this is what amounts to a delegate from the state party to the National Democratic Committee that then votes on National Democratic Committee business, such as organizing the national convention and all those sorts of the party rules, how the delegates work, all those sorts of things. A lot of stuff that tends to fly under the radar, maybe of the average voter who doesn't understand the work that goes into doing some of this. So here to talk with me about this is Zachary Raknerud. You may recognize him. He was a candidate for the U.S. House last election cycle. Now he is campaigning for or running to be national committeeman. Zach, how you doing?
Well, how you doing?
Was I being too mean to you Democrats there?
No. I think you're pretty on the nails that it's just empirical reality at this point, the struggles that the NPL has foregone the last couple decades. So it's a matter of how we're going to turn it around. Why do you want to be national committeeman for your party? I think the direction of the DNC is probably a big part of why there's so much struggle here for Democrats in North Dakota. I think a lot of the general voter base in North Dakota really looks at the brand of the Democratic Party, and when they think Democrat, they think Nancy Pelosi, they think Chuck Schumer. They don't think about Josh Boucher, Aaron Oban, Ruth Buffalo, elected leaders that we have here in North Dakota. There's a significant optics issue when it comes to states like this. And so it's a matter of how do we get Democrats on the national level to stop portraying this elitist, coastal, urban facade in a way, and to actually show that the DNC and the Democratic Party has policies that would actually better the lives of people in the state of North Dakota.
I think it's fair to say that the Democrats do have a perception issue, in that if you look at some of the most visible people who often represent Democratic politics, whether they're officially part of the Democratic Party or not, but I think from the public's point of view, sometimes it's hard to draw those distinctions. I mean, these days it's tech billionaires. These days it's a lot of Hollywood celebrities. I mean, very, very rich people who, let's face it, don't maybe really understand what life's like for a farmer or a coal miner or a roughneck working here in North Dakota. And in a lot of ways are actively hostile in terms of their policy platforms to those livelihoods. I mean, it's one message that I've been trying to argue to North Dakota's Republicans is that Trump was North Dakota seen as a Trump state, and there's true. We have a lot of enthusiastic supporters of the Trump movement here, but my argument has been that for a lot of, and I would argue even most North Dakota Republicans, which almost sort of translates into most North Dakotans, Trump was an expression of a mood, I think, first of all, but also B, the default choice who wasn't Hillary Clinton and wasn't Joe Biden in those two elections. And for a lot of North Dakotans, I don't know that they necessarily like Trump all that much or Trumpism. I think they didn't like the tweeting and a lot of his activities and a lot of the things he had to say. But as a practical matter, if Donald Trump's not going to shut down a pipeline and if he's not going to regulate your farmland to death, then what are those kitchen table issues? I mean, those are things that people vote on, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of people who could put up with his nonsense on Twitter as long as they got to keep their jobs.
Yeah. The economic day-to-day life of people is something that's very important when it comes to the way they vote. And when you talk about a national Democratic Party, like you said, that is just across the board uniform message against all fossil fuels, in order to appeal to a base at other areas of the country, it's going to have political consequences, and it has here in North Dakota for sure.
How many members of the DNC does the Democratic-NPL have?
It'd be just the committee man and the committee woman. So Ruth Buffalo is currently the committee woman for North Dakota, and Josh Boucher is the former committee man, and he's resigning that role to focus more on his legislative role.
Is that dictated? It has to be one guy and one gal? That's how that works?
Yep.
Okay. And then is Ruth Buffalo, her term's not up this time?
No, it's not.
Okay, so you're running for the one. I'm just clearing all this stuff up. I'm probably more familiar with how the Republican process works for this than the Democrats, because they don't necessarily have to be identical. So how do you, as one of two members of representing the North Dakota Democratic-NPL, I mean, how do you feel like you're going to be outnumbered if you were to be elected and to go to the Democratic National Committee? I mean, how do you convince these people from other parts of the world, hey, you have to start caring some about North Dakota?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to boil down with the structure of DNC committee man and committee woman. It's similar to how the Senate is broken out in the real world politics. And every state, no matter how small it is, getting a committee man and committee woman means that there's parts of this country that are forgotten all across, whether it's Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Iowa, all these rural states each have a committee man and a committee woman, where, California and New York each get a committee man and committee woman. So if you're able to create coalitions with the other states where there's significant optics issues, I feel confident in being able to build those partnerships and to bring a strong message to the DNC that what you're doing is not working in these parts of the country. We need to actually recalibrate, refocus our policy proposals and our brand perception to the middle of the country and talk about issues that matter to them, their day-to-day lives, what really impacts them. And so if I'm able to create those partnerships, I think we can have a good shot to make some noise at the DNC. That would be my commit to do as a DNC committee man, I feel like I'm somebody who can bring a message with passion, but at the same time, maintain respect and not make it look like it's out of pure anger. And just being able to communicate exactly what we believe would be better focuses for the DNC to help repair a national brand image that's really at about its lowest point in history right now.
I like there's a popular movement, and I see it on Twitter all the time, although who cares about Twitter, honestly. But I do see people expressing the point of view that states like North Dakota shouldn't have as much representation in the United States Senate as a state like California, that we're overrepresented. And I think the point that you just made is why that's important. Geographical diversity is as important as I think if you continue, our system of government is set up in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate to recognize that geographical diversity is important as well, and that if we don't elevate the voices of more rural states like North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, Wyoming, if we don't elevate those voices, then we run the risk of, I think, a sort of balkanization of our country, where you have places that maybe aren't as densely populated as California or New York or something, but yet still have millions of people living there and deserve to be heard, and not shouted down by the much louder numbers in coastal and urban areas. Now one thing that interests me about your point is I think a lot of Democrats, because I've been seeing them make this argument for a long time, on the assumption that Republicans are going to be done in by demographic shifts. Our country is becoming less white. The Republican Party is I think it's fair to say, a very white party. I mean, that's the demographic, is white Americans, for better or worse. And there's a lot of Democrats who have the feeling that the time will do Republicans in, because immigration and other growing areas. And I don't necessarily think that's true, because if you look at, for instance, in the Hispanic community, this is not a monolithic voting block. There's a lot of different ways to be Hispanic, first of all. And they don't necessarily all believe one way just because of the color of their skin. So I think there's some mistaken notions there. Also, I've been hearing Democrats saying that this is going to happen for like a generation now, and it still hasn't happened. And I'm beginning to think maybe it won't. But I think there's Democrats who feel like they can ignore places like North Dakota because it doesn't matter, because places like California and New York will give them enough to make it over the hump. Will give them enough to win the elections anyway, so who cares about North Dakota? And I kind of feel like maybe you feel like that's wrong too.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I really like your point that I think too often we think of certain groups as monoliths, and that's just not the case. The Democratic Party still has to make their case to these groups that they are the better option. And we saw in Florida this year in 2020 that a significant amount of Cuban immigrants went for Trump because of certain perceptions they have of the Democratic Party and where they come from. It's not a guarantee that demographic shifts are going to help the Democratic Party. It's got to come down to a Democratic Party who's actually receptive and focused on working families and their bottom lines day to day. And I will say that watched the State of the Union last night. Joe Biden wasn't my first, second, third pick for the Democratic nominee, but I will be honest with you that I was very impressed with his State of the Union last night. There was a lot of very tangible bottom line investments in young families across this country that if he were to get the line down and actually get some of these things passed, I think it would actually go a long way to addressing some of the perceptions people have of the Democratic agenda.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's more pragmatism to a point. Although some of the level of spending, I was reading an article with and I had it printed out for yesterday's show, and now I don't have it on my desk anymore. But I mean, it's a lot of money, and there's a point at which philosophy and ideology come out the window, and we're just down to math. And listen, I completely understand that the Republicans don't have any room to talk about fiscal responsibility. I actually, for my Saturday column, ran the numbers today, and the national debt increased from January of 2017, when Donald Trump took office, to last month, or I should say through April 26th, so just a few days ago, the national debt grew over 41%. That's not sustainable. So there's got to be some grounding. I mean, you say, I agree with you that he is. There seems to be more pragmatism and less sort of pie in the sky idealism, which I think we kind of got a lot of during the Obama administration. I appreciate that, but pragmatism also has to be governed by the reality of how much money we have to spend, and the fact that even if we raise taxes, are we going to raise taxes by trillions of dollars a year to pay for all this? Because that's what it would take to get all this done. So that's a tough argument, I think, and it's tough especially for people from our part of the world who are culturally, fiscally conservative, and are going to look at a lot of that and just say, we don't want higher taxes, and we're willing to go without a lot of the things you're promising because we can't afford them. And maybe you disagree. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth here, and I'm monologuing, and I don't want to have a whole debate about Joe Biden's platform. That's maybe for another show. But I mean, it's just like those are some of the disconnects that I feel like Democrats, if they want to start winning in elections in North Dakota, they have to bridge.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that you have to look at exactly what the proposals are and then talk about people honestly about how much they cost. You talk about childcare investments. That's something that is a significant strain on the bottom lines of so many families. And to have President Biden go out there and say that if you're working class, we're gonna use public funds to address the cost of childcare. That's something that's meaningful. It's significant. And you can always talk to people about the fact that the IRS estimates that we have $1 trillion per year of tax revenue that's not collected because we don't have the proper enforcement in place, which President Biden is also addressing. And he talks about how there's 25 gigantic multinational corporations that aren't paying a dime in federal taxes. Those are the sorts of messages that people really understand that, we have the money to pay for these things. And at the end of the day, we have global competitors right now that are kind of taking a page out of the U.S. playbook from the New Deal era, where they invest significant sums of money into their country to rebuild it. And we saw the economic fruits of that here in the United States. After the New Deal, we really built a strong middle class. We built a nation with significant infrastructure investments. Those things pay themselves back. And it's not just about the upfront cost. It's about how much economic activity you're generating with the investments. And I think that's a case that we can make.
Yeah, maybe. I think there's also the argument that there's no such thing as a free lunch. The money has to come from somewhere, and you're going to take it from some people and give it to other people. And the assumption is that redistribution, I guess, through various programs and mechanisms is going to be beneficial. But I think what a lot of times is not included in that calculation is the economic activity and the opportunity that you may be destroying by taking it away from those other people in the first place. It's a balance. And it's a balance on everything. I mean, if you want to build a new park in your city, well, that's going to cost some money, and you're going to have to raise some taxes, and everybody has to do a cost-benefit analysis. Yay, we get a new park that makes our community more livable and more beautiful, but on the other hand, our taxes are going to go up a little bit. That's the way it's supposed to work, and what I'm afraid of is that we're just completely disconnected from reality, where we're spending money we don't have, and nobody really wants to pay for it. Everybody wants all the goodies, and nobody really wants to have that consequential discussion about, well, this is what it's going to cost us, and it's a real cost, and we can't pretend like it's not. Like because Republicans are really bad about assuming that tax cuts pay for themselves, which is almost always not true. They cost real revenue. If you cut taxes, the government's going to have less revenue to operate to do the things that government does, whether they're all things that we want government to do or not. But what Democrats are really bad at is assuming that we're going to put this government program in place, and there's not going to be any side effects from its cost or from its impact on the way society works, what sort of private sector ventures it may be displacing. I think both sides have to come to reckoning with those sorts of economic policies.
Yeah, there's a balance for sure. And what I would say is just that with the Democrat side right now, I'm really eager for the next couple of years to really talk about, we have all this COVID legislation that's passed through Congress and a lot of federal dollars that are going to be coming to North Dakota. And I saw that you had a piece, was it just last night, where you're talking about how there's a battle going on between whether the governor's executive committee or the legislature should really tackle those new funds. Yeah. And whatever happens in that, there's going to be projects, there's going to be investments in North Dakota, there's going to be a balancing, a more balancing of our budget than what would have happened if those federal dollars did not come in. And we're going to be able to point to those things to say that these things came with zero GOP support. And one really interesting point that I want to talk to you about is one aspect that I think we really see here in North Dakota is what happens when a supermajority is elected and the political consequences that can come with that. This last session was, I think you would agree that there's been certain elements of it that have been just a mess. And I think we can make the case to North Dakotans that, let's start voting for the people, the candidates, and bring some balance back, because right now having a supermajority, whether it's in a Democrat supermajority in California or a Republican supermajority in North Dakota, almost always a supermajority isn't good. We need to have some of that balance and have some discussion. And we're going to have to make that case to people in North Dakota that Dem-NPL candidates are ones that work hard and ones that bring forward more tangible solutions, and they deserve to have a bigger seat at Bismarck.
Yeah. I don't know. And I say that, I mean, at some point it's the will of the people. I think that, and actually before we get to that, Kyle has a question in the live chat on YouTube. He says, what are your thoughts on Biden saying "we the people" is the government last night during his speech? And I guess, I don't know, I guess that didn't, as somebody who I guess I'll be honest. I view government as a necessary evil. I kind of subscribe to the Madison view that if we were angels, we wouldn't need government. But we're not angels, so we need government. I'm not very enthusiastic about it and would like to keep it very limited because generally I want as much as we can trust people to just kind of pursue their happiness and pursue their prosperity on their own steam, and government sort of govern those intersections where of necessity our lives intersect with one another. That's my point of view. Other people obviously are very different, but government is the people. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be us. And we do sometimes talk about, I think Republicans talk about government as it's like this other thing, and it's not made up of human beings, our fellow citizens. In much the same way that Democrats talk about corporations as if they're not collections of people organized around a goal. I mean, it's always. I was just reading. There's this great anecdote I attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if this is actually something he said, but apparently Abraham Lincoln, during the heights of the Civil War, was telling a story about a chess master who was challenged at the time to play against a machine. And he had never lost before, and all of a sudden this machine kept beating him in chess time after time after time. And the guy got up and he started looking around the machine and looking in it, and then finally he said, "Hey, there's a man in there." And that was Lincoln's argument, is there's always a man in the machine. And we forget that in politics a lot. At the end of the day, it's all just people. So I don't really have a problem with that. Government's people. Corporations are people. Labor unions are people. We're all just people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when looking at a point like that, I think it really boils down to the focus of federal government the last 20 years seems to be much more about special interests and those who contribute to political campaigns. And I think we're finally starting to see a little bit of a realignment post-Trump, post-COVID, of more government that's actually, receptive to addressing bottom line issues of families. When we talk about universal preschool and infrastructure investments, these are the things that people have been waiting for a while, and we really haven't got it for at least 10 years.
Yeah, well, some people have been waiting for them. I'm not sure that everybody is anxious to go down those roads. You were talking about supermajorities, though, and I wrote another column, and I argued that the success of the North Dakota Republican Party isn't just some accident of politics. I hear a lot of people in the state talking about redistricting. That's kind of a hobby horse of Lloyd Omdahl, where he called the apportionment, he called it malapportionment. And I don't think it's a trick. I don't think that Republicans have controlled the governorship since 1992 and both houses of the legislature since 1994 and every statewide elected office in the state executive branch since 2008, and the only Democrat to win a statewide election since 2008 is Heidi Heitkamp. I don't think that just happens. I don't think that that's just rank partisanship. Republicans, I think for the most part, have done a very good job of administering the state. I think there's been a degree of pragmatism that a lot of times they maybe don't get credit for from Democrats who, for partisan reasons, maybe want to push the idea that Republicans are doing a terrible job. I think in the eyes of most North Dakota voters, as measured by the way they're voting in one cycle after another, are pretty satisfied with Republican leadership. Now, I do agree with you that this section has exposed some problems, and I think there's a faction of the Republican movement in North Dakota that, A, thinks North Dakota is a lot more right-wing than it actually is, and B, have lost sense, I think, of what it means that they're pursuing culture war, they're pursuing, sort of an ideological gift basket, losing sight of what wins elections still, at least in our state, is competent governance, which I think for the most part Republicans have been guilty of in North Dakota for a couple of generations now, and largely has been the reason why, because Democrats can win in North Dakota. Not that long ago, the entire congressional delegation were Democrats. And I think Republicans have I think you can't ignore that they have done a better job of governing. So from that perspective, I don't think supermajorities are necessarily a bad idea. If it's a competent supermajority that's governing well, I don't see it as a problem.
Yeah, I think that we just have to make the case that we're starting to see the cracks, that This last session was one where we're seeing those, and that the supermajority and the factions that are coming with it are kind of undoing the gains that voters were hoping for. Because I agree with you. I think the GOP and the NDGOP made a better case over the last 20 years for the people of North Dakota, and they won because of it. There's no I don't think there's this grand conspiracy about redistricting. There can be a nuanced discussion in the weeds and the details of exactly where it may have had an impact.
Well, some of the stuff, I thought the point about making the plans public, I don't think was such a bad thing. I think initially one of the Republican plans for redistricting, they were going to keep some of that a secret, and do it out in the light of day. I think that's a fair argument. But for the most part, I mean, you look at the last redistricting. You tell me how Republicans can redistrict in North Dakota without screwing over some other Republicans. Because there's just not that many Democrats that you can stick it to, just as a practical matter. Sorry, go ahead and finish your thought.
And speaking on that point, I would just say that one thing I really want to see the DNC and then really the DemNPL do, and then if I get this role, I would be active in coordinating with the Kennedy Center and the DemNPL. But we don't really do a good job of talking up our DemNPL candidates or Democratic candidates on the national stage. The last 4 years and even before that has been, look how bad Republicans are on these certain issues. Look how intolerant they are. Look how gross they are. And that's been so much of the message of the Democrats on the national stage, but I've also seen it a bit on the DemNPL that's like, let's just keep an eagle eye on Kevin Cramer and dunk on his statements whenever he says something crazy, or doing the same thing about any GOP legislative leaders in the state government. I would much rather see an approach where we say, like, look at this great paid family leave bill that Carla Rose Hansen was working on, or look at the work that Aaron Oban is doing in Bismarck, and use floor speeches, talk about how proud we are of those Democratic NPL lawmakers, and say that we need your help to get more of them in Bismarck to bring more of this perspective and to have a better balance. So I'm looking forward to doing whatever we can to amplify more of the Democrats and to not talk about, we're not Republicans. Like, I don't think that that's been even close to the right strategy.
No, but a lot of the strategy, because I like the point you're making, because a lot of the strategy has been Republicans are evil, racist, bigots who want to suppress the vote and everything else. And that's a tough sell when you say that in a state where probably around 50% of people just straight up identify as Republicans. And then you have probably another 10 to 15% who identify as independents who consistently vote Republican. And now you're telling them that Republicans are evil, racist, bigots, vote suppressors, and all this other stuff. And they're thinking, no, we're not. Why should I vote for you? You hate me. That's a tough thing. Sean has a question in the live chat. He says, what ideas does your party bring in North Dakota that would convince the people to bring a balance of power to Bismarck? How do you separate yourselves from the national party, which I think is the whole point you're trying to make? I mean, simultaneously, you want to go to the national party and say, you guys need to start caring about North Dakota. But simultaneously, it's almost like the Democratic NPL, and they've tried, not very well, in past election cycles, but to draw a distinction between the Democratic NPL and the national party. It almost seems like you're trying to do two things that are almost contradictory.
Yeah, it's a tough sell. Like, we have a big job in front of us, but I think it's really going to boil down to having a better coordination and amplification of candidates across the board, and really having a positive message. Like, we got to move away from really just contrasting us so much with the GOP, and just say, like, this is what we have to offer and this is what we want to bring. And we need to talk about those things when it comes to, like, common sense policies at the statewide government. Like, those are the priorities of the DemNPL, and we talk about funding certain things, and we talk about just ensuring that we have had a good balance of public spending in North Dakota, but we don't need to go too far in the way of the austere, and really making sure that we're taking care of these institutions that we have in place. And it's going to be a long, hard journey, but we got to start by just being genuine, not attacking Republicans so much, but just really talking about, like, what do we bring to the table? And as far as separating ourselves from the national Democratic message. It's also a thing where I want to go in and try to do what I can to change the perception of the Democratic Party, because it looks like they're starting to make some good steps towards actual pragmatic legislation and not just, like I said, talking about how bad the GOP is.
Do you think, and something that I have been accused of, let's just say certain elements of my audience have taken to calling me a communist because I've never liked Donald Trump. Before the Capitol riot and some of the stuff that happened at the end of the election, I could understand the pragmatic reasons, and I still understand the pragmatic reasons for voting for him, for the things we talked about before, where if you're a roughneck and the choice is Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I understand the calculation of voting for Donald Trump. You may not even think he's a good president, but at least you think, well, he's probably going to appoint judges that I'm going to like better, and he's probably going to put people in his cabinet that I'm going to like better, and he's going to surround himself with people. I understood that pragmatism. After the attempt, after the riot at the Capitol, and after I can't understand why people would continue to support Donald Trump. And so I think it's very important for conservatives like me to speak out and to defend our movement and to say that conservatism can't just be about opposing everything that liberals are for. We have to start talking about what our ideas are, because I think conservatives have good ideas. And I think North Dakota is proof positive that Republicans can have good ideas and can govern well and can win elections based on that. I mean, we're not really that far removed from Ronald Reagan winning a national election with 49 out of the 50 states. You know, that is a thing that happened running as a conservative. So, you know, I think conservative, but so much of it is just wrapped up in sort of the Fox News, look at all the stupid things, what you were just talking about, where liberals talk that all Republicans are, the MSNBC nightly lineup, Republicans are evil, nasty, horrible bigots. And it's really just Republicans saying the same things. Well, they're communists and they're everything else. How important do you think it is? This is the point that I'm trying to get to, because I think it's important. I've been trying to speak out against Trumpism and Donald Trump and the elements in the conservative party that I think are moving it, the conservative movement, that are moving it away from a movement of ideas into a movement that's just culture war. How do you think it's important for Democrats to speak out too and say, hey, employees at Simon & Schuster who don't want to publish Mike Pence's book, you're wrong. We don't ban books in America. You know, how important do you think stuff like that is?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to identifying where you think that should be called out, because it is something unique in the fact that, you know, the President Trump and kind of the I don't even know what the word is here, but the kind of the fringe stuff that came with President Trump and like kind of the conduct and the very like kind of flipping the table on its head of American politics is something that's been unique and interesting to see unfold over the last 5 years. But if there are certain situations, you know, like we can talk about Democratic leaders in maybe more urban areas who are just completely disconnected from economic realities here in North Dakota. And I think, yes, like when there are times like that, and if Biden says stuff that is completely detrimental to the livelihood of North Dakotans, then yeah, we need to learn to speak out against it. And we need to learn to say, like, here's what you could do to actually make inroads here. Like, I believe strongly, I know it will never happen, but President Trump coming to North Dakota twice was no small thing. I think that was very impactful for the people around here to have a president who was receptive and actually came here physically to talk to us. I would love to see a Democratic Party that takes that initiative and visits areas of the country where they're not necessarily popular. I would love to see something where, like, in an ideal world, President Biden would come to the Bakken and he would talk to the people there and he would say, I understand you're upset about some of the direction on pipelines and stuff, but I want to work with you. Let's create jobs here in North Dakota. Let's capture all the methane that's being flared. Let's do things like that because it tackles climate change issues and it creates energy for us. It's a bipartisan thing. Like, trying to find areas like that.
That's the thing that frustrates me. I mean, it's like we just want to throw coal away, but yet we have 800 years supply worth of coal here. We have some promising science and technology that suggests that we could use coal in a way that's a heck of a lot cleaner. And by the way, the coal that we're burning today, you turn back the clock even 10, 15, 20, 30 years, is a heck of a lot cleaner today. We have made progress. We have demonstrated that we could do that. I would like a Democrat to say, listen, there is a place for coal in the future, and it works. And by the way, we need baseload power, as some of the power outages over the winter, those very scary power outages demonstrated. Some of that pragmatism from the Democratic Party, I think, would go a long way. Sean has...
I agree, and I think... I would just say real quick that I think that you nailed it, and that Democrats need to have a more pragmatic approach and understanding that we can talk about windmills and solar panels as much as we want, but at the same time, that base load power is so important, and the reality empirically is that battery technology is not there yet in order to supply base load with those renewable energies, and that we are going to have to rely on sources like coal. So if we're going to talk to people here in North Dakota, we have to acknowledge that reality, and we have to say, let's look at carbon-free base load alternatives. In the meantime, we're going to have to operate things like coal as cleanly as possible, because we cannot risk the energy independence of this country, and we can't risk having lights shut off in a rolling cycle. That is one way that
also, how do you
things
develop,
go south quick.
Right. How do you grow your economy to compete with emerging economies like China, for instance, when you can't rely on the power grid? Right? I mean, the power's going on. How do we can't. Or if utility bills are spiking, right? We can't, which is another thing. Like inflation is a very scary thing that we don't have time probably to dig into right now. Another comment from the live chat, which I think is important, because he says, are you willing to embrace a pro-life and pro-gun platform to align yourself with North Dakota values? And that's something that is very tricky. It's those sort of monolithic single issue issues. That was terrible. I'm not coming up with the right word, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Those bellwether, just absolute, like if you're not, I mean, because people care, right? I mean, so if you're pro-life, or pro, or on the other side of it, you're pro-choice, or the gun issue, those are tough issues in our parts of the world. We just had a debate in the legislature over, and I saw where the Democratic-NPL sent out a press release accusing the Republican majority in the legislature of being against the First Amendment, because they told the university system that they can't partner with groups that promote abortion anymore. And to me, I was less worried. I liked the program. I've looked into the program at NDSU that's now apparently no longer. It was a birth control, sex education program, which, by the way, has probably done more to stop abortions than a lot of the legislation that the legislature has passed. I mean, to me, if you don't want abortions, then birth control is kind of the way to go, right? I mean, let's teach people how to not have babies that they're not ready for. Anyway, but it's a tough thing, because you look at like a group like Planned Parenthood. It's hard to ignore that the rallying point there is Planned Parenthood, which, I'm sorry, in a lot of ways has become a de facto wing of the Democratic Party. You look at the way they donate their money. You look at the way they organize campaigns for Democratic candidates. It's hard to split that off and to say, well, let's keep politics out of NDSU so that NDSU can continue partnering with this very, very partisan organization. That's a tough sell.
Yeah, I think we have to really, those culture war issues and those like really top of mind for so many voters is where I think that's one of the biggest challenges facing us coming up. And I think it's really important that we highlight that, there's a lot of issues out there. Those are two of them. Those issues, by and large, are going to be dictated by the courts. When we talk about the abortion issue specifically, we're talking about like electing Dem-MPLers at the legislative level. These sorts of battles are going to happen in the judicial system. And while, people can have their viewpoints on it, even here in the Dem-MPL, we had state treasurer candidate Mark Haugen, who was unabashedly pro-life. And you know what? Like, I campaigned with him across the state, and we might disagree on like where the government plays a role in that, but that's okay. He still held the values of the DemNPL, even though he disagreed on that issue. We have to understand that, people are very nuanced. They have different viewpoints. There's probably people out there who are very, very liberal on something and very conservative on another issue. It doesn't mean they don't belong in either party.
Yeah, I know Mark well. Mark invited me one time down to, I don't know that they entirely understood what they were getting, inviting the libertarian guy. I think they thought I was going to take a lot of traditional Republican positions on social issues. I'm not a very good social conservative. I'll tell you that right now. Be upfront about it. But he invited me down to the University of Mary to talk to the Catholic kids about about social issues, and it was an interesting session. I had a lot of fun. And Mark's a great guy, a lot of integrity, and was very pro-life. And by the way, attracted in that race some very conservative endorsements. I mean, one of the national committee members for the North Dakota Republican Party, I think was endorsing him on Facebook. In fact, I think Senator Kevin Cramer's wife, Chris Cramer, was endorsing him on social media. So I mean, which maybe goes to show that Democrats can win here in North Dakota if they're the right, if they have the right, or if they're articulating the right message, maybe.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say real quick on the gun issue too is that I think too often it's seen as a binary thing, and I think Democrats can make a lot of headway by maybe introducing legislation of their own that shows they're not against gun ownership. Something like a tax credit for somebody who purchases a gun safe, because we've seen across this country there's an epidemic of children getting a hold of unsecured guns and either shooting one of their family members or shooting themselves.
Or how about one thing, the city of Minot, I don't remember if he did this years ago, they got a federal grant and it was for like neighborhood crime prevention or something. And I think they actually used the money to put on a gun. They partnered with the local gun club and put on a training program where you could come, even if you don't own a gun, you could come, and I went to it. And they talked about, this is a revolver, this is a pistol, this is a shotgun, this is a rifle. When people are using these terms about guns, this is what they mean. And oh, by the way, let's go over to the range, and we have instructors and we have professionals on hand, and you can actually shoot some of these guns and learn how they feel and learn how they work. What a great program, right? Let's just promote gun literacy and safety, because these things exist in our society and they're not going away anytime soon. And I think there's some common ground that Democrats could find with Republicans on, for instance, like straw purchases, right? Or people who are purposely trying to avoid some of the background check things that we have in place. I think a lot of people in the Second Amendment movement would be very happy to go along with stuff like that, because we don't want people being irresponsible with guns. We want people to be safe with their guns. That's very central to the Second Amendment movement. So there are opportunities there if we could just get over ourselves a little bit. And if everybody could just get off Twitter at this point, what a better world it would be, right? Anyway, well, Zach, I think we're starting to run out of time. Any last thoughts before I let you go?
No, I'll just say that I'm excited to, do whatever I can in the years to come to try to make the case to North Dakotans that DemNPL values are North Dakota values. I really do believe that there are common ground issues that we can have with the NDGOP to govern pragmatically, to have a better future for this state. And I'm excited to do whatever I can. So I'm hoping that I can serve in this capacity after May 8th as DNC committeeman. And I appreciate you having me on to chat about it.
Well, I will say, I think you guys do have the Democratic NPL has some opportunities right now in front of them if you can capitalize on them. And I'm saying that not even that I'm necessarily happy about it, because a lot of the ideas I think we've talked a lot about the things that we can agree on. I think we can't ignore the fact that there's some things we're just not going to agree on. And I think if we want to govern well, you kind of have to focus on, okay, what's possible, right? But I think you guys have some opportunities. Whether or not you can capitalize on them, I guess remains to be seen. But I appreciate your time, Zach, and I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future.